We are making good progress.
Suction here.
More gauze, please.
Pressure is stable.
Almost there. Keep going.
Hold it steady. We're draining it effectively.
The sirens were screaming. Claire's hands trembled as the ambulance jolted down the dark suburban road. Her son's body lay limp beside her, strapped to the gurney, the soft rhythm of the heart monitor beeping like a countdown. Josh's skin had gone pale, his lips tinged blue. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. There was a faint smell of antiseptic and blood in the air. It was just a pimple, Claire whispered, staring down at his swollen cheek. God, it was just a pimple. She said it again, louder this time, like if she kept repeating it, someone would stop this nightmare. The paramedic didn't answer. He was busy adjusting Josh's oxygen mask, tapping numbers into a monitor, his brow furrowed. Claire had never seen a teenager look so lifeless. At 3:07 a.m., they wheeled Josh through the ER doors. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A nurse shouted for a crash cart. Doctors swarmed him like bees, stripping away his hoodie and shirt, exposing a patch of red, angry skin that had spread across his jawline and neck like wildfire. Someone yelled, "We've got sepsis, severe. Get him on broad-spectrum antibiotics now." Claire's legs gave out. She found herself sitting in a hospital chair, unable to breathe, clutching her phone like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her husband, Thomas, was still on his way, stuck in a construction site 2 towns over when she called 911. He didn't understand. He hadn't seen how bad it had gotten. Hell, she hadn't either, not really. It had all happened so fast. A pimple, a little swelling, a day of fever. Then this. Someone asked for insurance. Claire blinked up at the woman behind the glass at the reception desk. He's under our plan, I think. Blue Cross. I didn't bring his card. Her voice cracked. "You'll need to sign this acknowledgement," the woman said flatly, sliding a clipboard through the window. "Standard ER admission. If the insurance doesn't cover it, you're responsible for all charges." Claire stared at the form. Her hands shook as she scrawled her name on the line. Josh could die, and they wanted her to worry about co-pays. A nurse returned and took her back to the ICU hallway. Machines beeped, doors swung open and shut, nurses moved like shadows. She passed a father yelling into a phone about billing a mother sobbing into her sleeve. Then there was Josh, her Josh, lying unconscious under sterile white sheets, tubes running from his arms, an oxygen mask covering half his face. Claire stepped into the room like a ghost. The doctor looked up from the chart and met her eyes. He was young, too young to be the one standing between life and death. "He's stable for now," he said gently, "but we're not out of the woods. The infection's aggressive. We're running everything we've got." Claire nodded, tears blurring her vision. She sat beside the bed, took Josh's cold hand in hers, and leaned in close. "Baby, I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here." The machines buzzed on, and somewhere deep inside her chest, the guilt began to dig its claws in. Because she had seen the bump days ago. She had noticed the redness. She had even heard him complain that it hurt to chew. But she was busy, tired, overwhelmed. It hadn't seemed urgent. He didn't ask for help. And Thomas had dismissed it entirely. He's a teenage boy, that's what they look like. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't just puberty. It was something else. Something that had grown and festered, unseen, unheard, untreated, until it nearly killed their son. And now, as the machines kept him breathing, Claire sat motionless, staring at her son's face through the clear mask, thinking, how did we not see this coming? How did a family like theirs, educated, stable, loving, miss the signs until it was almost too late? And most of all, why had Josh never told them how much it hurt? Josh had stopped smiling in photographs. Claire noticed it for the first time during her sister's birthday party in early March. They'd gathered in the backyard for a group picture, Thomas grilling burgers in the background, the kids huddled on the porch steps. And when Claire clicked through the photos later that night, there he was. Josh, 13, hoodie up despite the spring sun, head tilted down, mouth tight. Not one hint of a smile. He hadn't always been like that. As a child, Josh had a crooked grin and a laugh that could light up an entire room. But somewhere between the start of 7th grade and now, the light had dimmed. He spent more time in his room, barely said more than a few words at dinner, and had recently developed an obsession with hoodies, pulling the hood so far forward it cast shadows over his face. Claire blamed hormones. Puberty was a tricky time for boys. She'd read the articles, mood swings, social anxiety, growing pains. And besides, Thomas had reassured her. "He's just turning into a man," he'd said over breakfast one morning, reading the news on his phone while Claire picked at her cereal. Let him be. I was the same way. But Claire wasn't so sure. Josh's skin had changed drastically over the past few months. It started with a few bumps on his forehead, but now his cheeks and chin were covered in deep, inflamed acne. He'd stopped wanting to go out, avoided mirrors, and one day she caught him washing his face in the kitchen sink with hand soap. She'd gently offered to buy him something from the pharmacy, maybe a facial cleanser, even suggested making an appointment with a dermatologist. But Josh just muttered, "I'm fine," and disappeared into his room. Claire didn't push. Money was tight anyway. Her hours at the library had been cut again, and Thomas was working weekends now, trying to catch up on bills after the furnace died in January. Their health insurance covered most essentials, but anything outside of routine checkups came with high copays. When she'd looked into a dermatologist for Josh, the soonest available appointment was 6 weeks away, and only with a $200 copay. She'd bookmarked the clinic's website and told herself she'd call when things settled down. But things never really settled down. There was always something. Groceries, the car needing new tires, the gas bill creeping up. Josh never brought it up again. So neither did she. One night, a few weeks later, she knocked softly on his bedroom door to ask if he wanted dessert. There was no answer. She opened it slowly, finding him hunched over his desk, sketching something on a notepad. The overhead light was off. Only the soft blue glow of his desk lamp illuminated the page. "What are you drawing?" she asked gently, stepping in. Josh looked startled. He covered the paper with his hand. "Nothing. Can I see? It's not finished." Claire hesitated. She noticed the fresh red bump on his jawline, swollen and angry-looking, barely hidden by the edge of his hood. She resisted the urge to touch it. "Well, I'm making brownies. Just letting you know." He nodded. She lingered a moment longer, watching the way he kept his eyes down. His lashes were long, dark, just like when he was a toddler. Something about the way his shoulders curled inward made her chest ache. Back in the kitchen, Claire stared at the brownie batter and wondered when her son had started shrinking from the world at dinner. Thomas made a joke about Mount Vesuvius erupting on Josh's cheek. He laughed, oblivious, but Claire saw the way Josh clenched his jaw, his fork pausing mid-air. He didn't say a word for the rest of the meal. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Claire opened her laptop and searched, "What to do when your teenage son won't talk to you?" She scrolled through blogs and parenting forums, finding everything from give him space to force family bonding time. Nothing felt quite right. She closed the laptop and sat in silence. The glow of the screen still burned behind her eyes. Josh wasn't misbehaving. He wasn't failing classes. He wasn't breaking rules or acting out. He was just disappearing. And somehow that was worse. Josh's hoodie became a second skin. He wore it to breakfast, to school, even to bed sometimes. Claire found one crumpled at the foot of his bed one morning, still damp with sweat. It smelled faintly of deodorant and something sour, like fear. She washed it and folded it neatly, placing it back on his chair without saying a word. In late March, the school hosted its annual spring parent-to-teacher conferences. Claire and Thomas attended together, an increasingly rare occurrence given their conflicting schedules, and sat through the usual round of polite smiles and academic summaries. Josh was doing well, at least on paper. His math scores were above average. He was quiet in class but respectful. No behavioral issues. Then came the last teacher, Ms. Gomez, his homeroom advisor. She closed her folder slowly. "Josh is quiet," she said carefully. "More so than usual. He rarely speaks unless called on. He doesn't participate in group activities anymore. A few students have commented that he keeps to himself during lunch." Claire felt her chest tighten. "Is anyone bothering him?" she asked. Ms. Gomez paused. "There's been some teasing, mostly about his skin, nothing overtly aggressive, but middle school can be cruel." Claire glanced at Thomas, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We've talked to him," Thomas said. "He says he's fine." Ms. Gomez nodded, clearly used to hearing that. "Just Keep an eye on him, she said. Sometimes kids don't say what they're really feeling. That night, Claire brought it up at dinner. Your teacher says you're keeping to yourself a lot these days. Josh shrugged. I guess. Are the kids at school bothering you? Not really. Thomas grunted. If someone gives you trouble, you look them in the eye and tell them to back off. That's what I used to do. Josh said nothing. Claire tried again. You can tell us anything, you know. If something's wrong, I'm fine. The silence stretched. The clink of silverware on plates became painfully loud. Thomas pushed his chair back. He's 13, Claire. Boys go through this. He doesn't need a therapist. He needs space. But Claire wasn't sure space was the answer anymore. The next morning, she stood at the kitchen sink, watching Josh walk to the bus stop from the window. His hoodie was pulled low, his backpack sagging. He didn't talk to the kids next to him. He didn't even glance at them. She picked up her phone and called their insurance provider again. She waited on hold for 16 minutes before a woman with a tired voice answered. Claire asked about dermatology coverage, explained that her son was struggling and needed help. The woman responded flatly, unless it's been referred by your primary physician and deemed medically necessary, dermatology for minors is not covered under your current plan. You can still proceed out of network, but you'll need to pay full cost upfront and submit for possible reimbursement. Claire hung up, frustrated. She checked the family bank account. $217.46 before the next paycheck. No overtime this week. No wiggle room. She thought about Thomas, about how he'd say it wasn't worth it, about how he still saw acne as a rite of passage, something every boy had to endure like a badge of masculinity. But this wasn't about a few pimples. This was about a child folding inward, piece by piece. That evening, Claire brought home a drugstore acne wash and left it on Josh's bathroom counter. No note, no lecture, just a gesture. She never saw him use it, but it was half empty a week later. Small victories. Still, the tension in the house was growing. Thomas had taken on extra shifts and came home exhausted, often too tired to talk. Claire was juggling her reduced hours and extra freelance work, cataloging digital archives from home just to make ends meet. They were both stretched thin. One night, Josh came down to dinner late, head bowed, the left side of his face hidden more than usual. When Claire finally caught a glimpse, she gasped. His jawline was swollen. Not just a pimple, this was something else. The skin was taut, inflamed, red-veined with purple. It looked painful just to touch. Josh, what happened? She asked. He jerked his head away. It's nothing. Sweetheart, that's not nothing. Thomas looked up from his plate. Did you try popping it? That's what's making it worse. You need to leave it alone. I didn't pop it, Josh muttered. It looks infected, Claire said. We should call the doctor. I said it's fine, Josh snapped, standing so fast his chair screeched backward. Can I just eat in my room? Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but Claire raised a hand. Go ahead, she said softly. Josh disappeared up the stairs. Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples. He needs boundaries. We're letting him run the show. No, Claire said quietly. He needs help. The words hung between them. Later that night, Claire stood outside Josh's door, hand raised to knock, but didn't. Inside, she could hear faint scribbling, drawing again. She turned away. In the dark hallway, she whispered to herself, we have to do something. 3 days later, the swelling had doubled in size. Claire noticed it when Josh tilted his head to grab the milk carton from the fridge. The skin along his jaw was stretched tight and glossy, the color deepening from angry red to a purplish hue. He flinched when the refrigerator door bumped against his elbow and turned away quickly, like he didn't want her to see. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't say anything then, not in front of Thomas, who was pouring himself coffee and mumbling about traffic. But later, as Josh was getting ready for school, she knocked on the bathroom door. Josh, can I come in? There was a pause, then a mumbled, yeah. He was rinsing his mouth when she entered, the bathroom mirror fogged from the shower. His hoodie was already on, though damp around the collar, and the hood hovered at the back of his neck, like armor waiting to be deployed. Let me see, she said gently, nodding toward the left side of his face. I'm fine, he muttered. Please. Reluctantly, he turned his head. Up close, it looked worse. The lump had grown, raised and tight like something boiling beneath the surface. It wasn't just a pimple anymore. There was heat radiating from it. The skin around it was slightly bruised. Does it hurt? She asked. Josh gave a single shrug, eyes down. Claire's throat tightened. We should call Dr. Levin, just have her take a look. Josh frowned. She's not going to do anything. She'll just say to clean it. She might prescribe antibiotics. Something to help with the infection. I don't want to miss school. Claire tilted her head. Are you worried about falling behind? No, he said. I just don't want to make a big deal. Her heart cracked a little. I'll think about it, he said finally, pulling his hood up. She watched him leave, backpack slung low over one shoulder, moving slower than usual. After he left, Claire sat at the kitchen table and dialed Dr. Levin's office. Next available appointment is April 12th, the receptionist said without hesitation. Unless it's an emergency. It's a facial infection, Claire said. Possibly abscessed. My son's 13. It's visibly swollen and painful. The woman's tone didn't change. April 12th is the soonest. If you feel it's urgent, you can go to urgent care. Claire had done that route before. The last time, when Josh sprained his ankle in gym, the urgent care visit cost them nearly $600 after insurance. And they'd waited 3 hours just to be told to ice it and rest. She asked, "Is a telehealth option available? We'd still need a referral for anything prescription-related," the receptionist said. "And unfortunately, we don't prescribe antibiotics without an in-person evaluation." Claire sighed. "Thanks anyway." She hung up and stared at the kitchen counter. The same headache that had been building behind her eyes for weeks throbbed like a pulse. She couldn't afford an urgent care bill right now. They were still paying off last month's dental visit. Thomas had just maxed out the credit card again to pay for the brakes on the van, and they still hadn't replaced the leaking water heater. Everything felt like it was on the verge of breaking. At dinner that evening, Josh barely touched his food. He chewed slowly, favoring one side of his mouth. Claire tried to keep the mood light, asking about school, bringing up a funny video she'd seen online. Thomas, already tired from a double shift, was mostly silent. Josh finally stood, leaving half his plate untouched. "Can I go?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. Thomas grunted after Josh left the room. "He's sulking again. He's in pain, Thomas. He hasn't said that." Claire gave him a look. "Because he's a 13-year-old boy who doesn't know how to say that." Thomas rubbed his forehead. "You want me to take him to the ER for a zit? It's not a zit anymore. Claire, he's got a lump the size of a walnut on his jaw, and he's running a low-grade fever. He's not eating. He barely talks." Thomas sighed, the kind that ended arguments. "Let's just give it one more day. If it doesn't go down, I'll take him myself." Claire nodded, not because she agreed, but because she didn't have the strength to keep fighting tonight. Upstairs, Josh sat at his desk, sketching again. The lamp cast shadows on the page, where lines curled and twisted like vines. In the center of the drawing, a figure hunched under a dark hood, face hidden, body shrinking into the ground like it wanted to disappear. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without thinking, he turned the page and wrote in the corner, "If I fade slowly, maybe no one will notice." That night, Josh didn't come down for dinner. Claire waited 10 minutes before climbing the stairs, plate in hand. She knocked once, then opened his door slowly. The room was dark except for the dim glow of his desk lamp. Josh sat curled in his chair, hoodie drawn tight over his head, arms wrapped around his stomach. "Sweetheart?" Claire stepped inside. He didn't answer. She set the plate on his nightstand. "You didn't eat lunch either. You need something in your system." Josh shook his head. Claire crouched beside him. From this angle, she could see the side of his face fully, and it was worse. The swelling had crept down his neck. The skin looked tense, almost shiny, stretched beyond comfort. His eye on that side was slightly puffy now, lower than the other. "Oh, baby," she whispered. He turned away. "I'm calling Dr. Levin again tomorrow," she said. "If we can't get in, we'll go to urgent care. I don't care about the cost anymore." Josh mumbled something. "What was that?" I said, I don't want to go. You need to be seen. I can't miss school." Claire blinked. "Why? Did something happen? Is there a test?" He shook his head. "Then what?" His voice was barely audible. "I just don't want people to look at me." Claire's chest tightened. She reached out, but Josh flinched. She pulled her hand back. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll figure it out." He didn't respond. Claire went downstairs, finding Thomas watching a rerun of a football game. A beer balanced on his knee. "He needs medical help," she said without preamble. "Tomorrow." Thomas didn't look up. "We talked about this. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. His eye is starting to swell now. He said he's fine." Claire stared at him. "Since when do we take medical advice from a 13-year-old? Thomas sighed, muted the TV. "Claire, we can't just keep rushing to doctors for every little thing. This isn't little." His face is inflamed. He hasn't eaten, and he's acting like he's in constant pain. You think I'm not worried? Thomas finally looked at her. I'm working 12-hour shifts. I'm juggling bills. And yeah, I'm scared too. But we can't afford another $600 urgent care bill right now, especially if they just tell us to keep it clean and monitor it. Claire clenched her jaw. And what if they don't? What if we wait too long? Thomas didn't answer. She left the room without another word. The next morning, Josh didn't come downstairs. Claire knocked again. Josh? You okay? No answer. She opened the door and found him still in bed, curled into a tight ball. He was sweating. The sheets were damp. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. Josh! His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Claire touched his forehead, burning. Oh my God, she whispered. Okay, we're going now. She didn't care what Thomas said. She grabbed her purse, keys, phone, and called the school to report his absence. Then she called his pediatrician's office. All lines are currently busy. Please hold for the next available representative. Claire paced the living room, phone to her ear, eyes on the stairs. 8 minutes later, a voice finally came on. Yes, this is Claire Henderson. My son, he's 13, has a facial infection that's gotten worse overnight. He's running a high fever now. The receptionist was polite but firm. Our next available appointment is still April 12th. If his condition has worsened significantly, we recommend urgent care or the emergency room. Claire gritted her teeth. Our insurance won't cover it. If it's life-threatening, the ER is required to treat him regardless of coverage. But we won't know if it's life-threatening unless someone sees him. I'm sorry, ma'am, that's the policy. Claire hung up and immediately called her insurance provider. Press 1 for English. Press 2 for member services. Your estimated wait time is 27 minutes. She hung up again. Her hands shook as she paced. How had it come to this? A week ago, it was just a pimple. Now her son was pale, sweating, barely responsive, and she was stuck arguing with robots and automated menus. Thomas came downstairs halfway through her panic spiral, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? Claire spun on him. He's feverish. He didn't eat. He looks like hell. Thomas looked alarmed for the first time. How high? I didn't take it yet. They went upstairs together. Josh was still in bed, eyes barely open. Claire pressed the thermometer into his ear. 103.4. She showed it to Thomas without a word. He exhaled slowly. Okay. Claire nodded, heart pounding. Josh blinked up at them, confused. Where? You're going to the hospital, Claire said gently, brushing his hair from his face. Josh tried to sit up, then winced. It hurts. I know. Just hang on, okay? She turned to Thomas. Go warm up the car. I'll get him dressed. 10 minutes later, they were pulling out of the driveway. Claire sat in the back with Josh, holding his hand, whispering softly. It's going to be okay, I promise. But inside, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. The hospital lights felt too bright. Claire gripped Josh's hand as they pushed through the automatic doors of Springfield Regional ER, the early morning air still clinging to their jackets. Josh was pale, half-conscious, head resting against her shoulder as a triage nurse came rushing forward with a wheelchair. He has a facial infection, Claire said quickly. It's spreading. He has a fever of 103. The nurse nodded, helping Josh into the chair. How long has it looked like this? Claire hesitated. A few days, but the swelling got worse overnight. This morning, he could barely sit up. Any allergies? Medications? No allergies. No current medications. The nurse pushed the chair toward the intake hallway, waving them along. Thomas followed in silence, jaw tight, eyes on Josh's slumped body. They were led into a small triage room. Another nurse took vitals, drew blood, and checked Josh's oxygen levels. Claire watched helplessly as they worked around her son, pulling back his hood, snapping on gloves, tapping keys into a terminal as if this were just another routine check-in. But it wasn't routine. When the nurse gently prodded the side of Josh's jaw, he cried out, a weak, breathy sound that twisted something deep in Claire's chest. We'll get a doctor in right away, the nurse said. You'll be moved to an exam room shortly. As she left, Claire collapsed into the corner chair, holding her hands between her knees to stop them from shaking. Thomas stood by the wall, arms folded. This is bad, he murmured. Claire didn't respond. This is worse than I thought. She looked up at him. I told you. Thomas sat down heavily. You think I didn't notice? I did. I just didn't know how bad it was. He kept saying he was fine. He's a kid, she snapped. He says what he thinks we want to hear. Thomas rubbed a hand down his face, weary. I didn't want to believe it was serious. Not with everything else going on. Claire closed her eyes. She didn't have the energy to argue. 10 minutes later, a woman from admissions entered the room with a clipboard. "Hi, I'm from billing. We'll need to verify insurance and have you sign a treatment authorization." Claire fumbled through her purse, pulling out her wallet and handing over the Blue Cross card. The woman typed something into a tablet. "It looks like your deductible hasn't been met this year, so some services may require upfront payment or be billed directly." Claire blinked. "He's got a severe infection. He's in pain. We're not here to shop around." "I understand," the woman said, though her tone remained flat. "But we do need acknowledgement of financial responsibility before further procedures." Thomas stood. "What kind of charges are we talking about?" The woman handed him a printed estimate: emergency evaluation, IV antibiotics, imaging, possible surgical consultation. The number at the bottom made Claire's stomach churn. Depending on coverage, the out-of-pocket could range from $1,200 to $4,000. "Jesus Christ," Thomas muttered. Claire grabbed the pen and signed the form without a word. Josh moaned softly from the chair. Claire knelt beside him, brushing sweat-damp hair from his forehead. He was burning up again. "Where's the doctor?" she demanded. "We need someone now." "They're coming," the nurse at the door said, checking a chart. 15 more minutes passed. Josh started to shiver. Claire stood and paced the room. Her nerves were fraying. Every beep, every footstep outside the door made her flinch. She kept glancing at the hallway, hoping, praying. Finally, the door opened, and a young man in scrubs entered. "I'm Dr. Harris. I'll be taking care of Josh today." He looked no older than 28, but his eyes were sharp, focused. He greeted them with a nod, turned his attention to Josh, and began a quick but thorough examination. "When did the swelling start?" he asked, gently pressing around the inflamed area. 3, maybe 4 days ago," Claire said. "It got worse yesterday, and this morning, he couldn't stand." "Fever's been persistent?" "Yes, over 103. Dr. Harris nodded grimly. "This looks like cellulitis, possibly developing into an abscess. Based on the location and symptoms, I'm concerned about deeper tissue infection. We'll start IV antibiotics immediately and run imaging to assess the extent." Claire felt like she could finally breathe, but then he added, "If the infection is tracking down the neck or threatening the airway, we'll need surgical drainage." Thomas paled. "Surgery? It's not uncommon in cases like this," Dr. Harris said, "but we need to act fast. Facial infections in this region can spread rapidly and become life-threatening if untreated." Claire felt the room tilt slightly beneath her feet. Josh whimpered again, barely responsive. Dr. Harris turned to the nurse. "Let's get him on fluids and start vancomycin stat. Page Ent for standby." The nurse moved quickly, prepping, and forth. Claire took Josh's hand again, squeezing gently. "We're right here, baby. You're going to be okay." Josh's lips moved, but no sound came out. She leaned in close. "I'm scared," he whispered. Claire's heart shattered. "I know," she said softly. "Me too." The 4-line was already in place when the ENT team arrived. Josh lay motionless on the hospital bed, his face slick with sweat, an oxygen cannula beneath his nose, the constant beeping of monitors punctuating the silence like a metronome counting down. His fever hovered at 103.2, despite fluids and antipyretics. The swelling along his jaw had become a grotesque bulge, discolored and tense. Claire sat in the chair next to the bed, arms folded tightly across her stomach. Every so often, she reached for Josh's hand, only to pull back, afraid of disturbing him. His skin felt hot, too hot. "Doctor." Harris stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing the initial imaging results on a tablet with the consulting NT. "Looks like early signs of deep space infection," the ENT said, tapping the screen. "Tracking into the submandibular area. He's lucky you brought him in when you did." Claire swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "We continue IV antibiotics and monitor closely," Dr. Harris replied. "If the swelling progresses or compromises his airway, he'll need surgical drainage. We've seen similar cases escalate quickly, especially in adolescents." Thomas stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes locked on the corner of the floor. He hadn't said much since the doctor arrived, but Claire could feel the tension rolling off him like heat. As the doctors conferred, and nurses moved around the room with quiet efficiency, Claire leaned forward, brushing a strand of damp hair from Josh's forehead. He stirred slightly but didn't open his eyes. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, mostly to herself. The ENT team left, promising to return within the hour. A nurse checked the four-line, adjusted the drip, and dimmed the lights. Then they were alone. For a long time neither of them spoke. The room was filled with low hums and soft mechanical sighs. A dull ache settled into Claire's chest, the kind that came from waiting too long, from pretending too much. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "I should have listened to you." Claire didn't answer. "I saw it happening," he continued. "I saw him hiding, the hoodie, the silence, the drawing all night. I just thought he'd grow out of it." Claire exhaled slowly. We both wanted to believe that. He looked at her, eyes rimmed red. "I thought if I pushed him, if I told him to toughen up, it would make him stronger." Claire turned to face him. Her voice was low, tight. "You taught him to stay silent, Thomas, to act like nothing hurts. You taught him that real men don't show weakness." He flinched. "And I let it happen," she added. "Because I didn't want to argue. Because I was tired. Because we were worried about bills and groceries and insurance premiums and everything else except the one thing that actually mattered." Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. "I was scared." Claire stared at him. "Scared of what?" she asked. He lowered his hands. "That we were failing. That we couldn't even afford a damn doctor visit. That something small, like a pimple, could undo all the stability we'd tried to build. So I ignored it. I ignored everything. Because I thought if I didn't name it, it wouldn't be real." Claire felt her throat close. She looked at Josh again, his pale skin, the rise and fall of his chest, the tight way his fingers curled slightly even in sleep. "It was always real," she said quietly. "We just didn't want to see it." Thomas sat down beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. They sat like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder, neither speaking, the silence between them filled with everything they didn't say for years. Eventually, the nurse returned with an update. "His white blood cell count is high," she said softly, "which confirms infection, but so far no signs of septic shock. That's good." Claire nodded, unable to find words. "If anything changes, breathing, blood pressure, consciousness, we'll move fast." "Thank you," Claire managed. As the nurse left, Claire stood and moved closer to the bed, brushing Josh's cheek lightly with her knuckles. His skin was still hot but not as burning as before. "Do you remember when he was 5? She asked suddenly, not looking at Thomas. "He fell off his bike, skinned his knee so bad it looked like raw meat, but he didn't cry. Not once." Thomas nodded slowly. He came inside, sat on the kitchen floor and said, "Mom, I think I broke the world." Claire smiled weakly. "He's always held things in," she said, "even when it hurt." Thomas looked down at the floor, maybe because we taught him that was the right way to be. They both knew the truth of that. Outside, the world moved on. Nurses walked by, monitors beeped, stretchers rolled past the glass window. Inside the room, time felt suspended. The machines kept humming, a low and steady song of borrowed time. Claire sat back down and took Josh's hand in both of hers. His fingers twitched faintly. Thomas watched her, then moved his chair closer. No more words passed between them that night, just silence and the endless sound of the 4-pump ticking beside their son's bed. The room felt colder now. Claire sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the machines blink and hum beside Josh's bed. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting a weak pulse over the white walls. Josh lay still, lips dry, breathing shallow and uneven despite the oxygen. She had barely moved in the past hour. The antibiotic drip continued steadily, but Josh's fever refused to break. A nurse had just come in to check vitals and left quickly, her expression unreadable. Claire didn't like that. Dr. Harris returned a few minutes later, this time without the tablet, just a clipboard and a tight look on his face. He walked in with purpose but not with panic, and somehow that made her more anxious. "I need to talk to you both," he said, glancing at Thomas, who stood by the window again. Claire stood. "What's happening?" "We've got the initial blood cultures back," he said. "They confirm a staph infection. It's aggressive and it's not responding quickly to the vancomycin." Claire's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Harris said carefully, "we need to move to surgical intervention." Thomas turned sharply. "You're saying surgery? On his face?" "Yes," the doctor said. "There's an abscess forming underneath the skin. If we don't drain it, the infection will keep spreading. He's already showing signs of systemic inflammation. His heart rate's elevated. Oxygen is dipping. If we wait, This could escalate to full-blown sepsis, or worse. Claire felt dizzy. He's already on the antibiotics. Can't we just wait a little longer? Give it more time? Dr. Harris shook his head gently. He doesn't have time. The finality in his voice landed like a punch. Claire looked at Josh. His face was barely recognizable now, one side swollen to the point of distortion, the eye on that side almost shut. The machines beeped faster than before. "What does the surgery involve?" Thomas asked, his voice rough. "A maxillofacial surgeon will make a small incision near the site to drain the pus and relieve pressure. It's a relatively quick procedure, but because of the area and the inflammation, it requires general anesthesia. We'll have an anesthesiologist monitor him the entire time." Claire couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son was 13. He was supposed to be worrying about algebra and skateboards, not incisions and anesthesia. She nodded slowly. "When?" "We're prepping the OR now. Within the hour." Claire sank into the chair beside Josh's bed. Thomas paced once across the room, then stopped at the foot of the bed, eyes fixed on the IV bag. "Will there be scarring?" he asked quietly. Dr. Harris nodded. "A small one, most likely. But he'll live." Claire reached for Josh's hand again. It was limp but warm. She squeezed it. Dr. Harris left the room to make arrangements. The silence that followed was different from before. Not waiting, not tense, just hollow. Thomas spoke first. "I never thought we'd end up here." Claire didn't look at him. "Neither did I." "I keep going over it," he said, voice low. "All the moments I could have said something different, done something, just looked closer." Claire leaned her forehead against Josh's arm. He was right in front of us, every day, and we didn't see it. We were working. Surviving. He was suffering. Her voice cracked. A nurse appeared at the door. "They're ready for him." Claire stood up so quickly the room tilted. She gripped the side of the bed to steady herself. Josh stirred slightly as they began to roll his bed out. His eyelids fluttered. A soft, broken sound escaped his throat. "Mom, I'm here," Claire said, walking alongside the bed as they pushed him down the hallway. "I'm right here, sweetheart." He didn't say anything else, but she saw the way his fingers flexed against the blanket. The OR was 2 floors down. Thomas followed behind them, silent, his eyes locked on the wheels of the gurney. They reached the pre-op area, where a nurse explained the procedure again, handing over forms to sign. Claire's hands shook as she scrawled her signature. "Will I be able to see him right after?" she asked. "We'll bring you to recovery as soon as he's stable," the nurse said gently. Claire nodded. They gave Josh something to relax him. Within seconds, his eyes closed again and his breathing deepened. Then they wheeled him through the double doors. Claire and Thomas were left alone in the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them with a finality that chilled her to the bone. The surgical wing was quiet in a way that made time feel suspended. Claire sat in a stiff plastic chair beside a vending machine that hummed faintly in the corner. She'd been staring at the same speck on the linoleum floor for the past 10 minutes, hands locked together so tightly her knuckles were white. Thomas paced, back and forth. His boots squeaked against the tile. Every time the OR doors creaked open, Claire's head snapped up, but it was never for them. "Do you think they'll tell us if something goes wrong?" she whispered. Thomas stopped mid-step. They have to. She didn't believe that. 37 minutes in, a nurse passed by and offered a tight smile. "Still in progress," she said. "No complications so far." Claire nodded, but the words didn't settle her nerves. She stood and walked to the small table by the wall, where someone had left a stack of old magazines and a pot of fake flowers. Josh's hoodie sat there too, folded, untouched since the prep nurse had handed it to her earlier. She picked it up, clutching it to her chest. Something shifted inside the pocket. Claire reached in, expecting a pencil, maybe a candy wrapper, but her fingers brushed paper. She pulled it out slowly. It was a folded notebook page, worn at the edges. She unfolded it carefully, a drawing, like always. But this one was different. The figure in the middle was unmistakably Josh, a hoodie pulled over his head, shoulders curled, surrounded by dozens of eyes, sketched in jagged charcoal lines. Above the figure, in capital letters, he'd written, "If I disappear, would anyone notice?" Claire's throat tightened so suddenly she thought she might choke. She sank back into the chair, the paper trembling in her hands. Thomas looked over. "What is it?" She handed it to him wordlessly. He read it once, then again. His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked as broken as the words on the page. "Oh God," he whispered. Claire didn't say anything. She couldn't. The air felt too thick. Thomas sat down beside her, pressing his palms to his eyes. All this time, he murmured. He was screaming, just silently. Claire leaned her head back against the wall, tears slipping down her cheeks. She remembered every moment she'd dismissed him, every time she'd chosen to finish the laundry instead of knocking on his door. Every he's just tired, and it's just hormones. Every second that she could have asked a better question, or sat down and just listened. He thinks we wouldn't notice, she said softly. Thomas didn't reply. Across the hall, someone wheeled a supply cart past. The clatter echoed like gunfire in the stillness. Time moved like molasses. Another 15 minutes passed, then 20. At last, the doors opened. Dr. Harris emerged, mask pulled down, hair net askew, and Claire could tell from the way he moved that it wasn't bad news. He did great, the doctor said with a small smile. We drained nearly 60 milliliters of pus and fluid from the abscess. We flushed the area, placed a drain. He's stable, breathing on his own. Claire nearly collapsed into her seat. Thomas gripped the armrest, exhaling a breath he must have been holding for an hour. He's in recovery now. It'll be a little while before he wakes up, but you can see him soon. Claire stood immediately. Thank you so much. The doctor nodded and disappeared back through the doors. They didn't say anything for a moment. Then Claire looked down at the drawing still clutched in her hand. When he wakes up, she said, we have to make sure he never writes anything like this again. Thomas nodded. We will. An hour later, a nurse led them into recovery. Josh lay in a dim room, hooked to fewer machines now, his face pale but peaceful. A small bandage covered the side of his neck where the incision had been made. His breaths were slow and even. Claire walked to his side and took his hand gently. His fingers twitched in response. Hey, she whispered, you made it. Josh didn't speak, still under the haze of anesthesia, but his eyes fluttered. She smiled through tears. You're safe. You're not alone. Thomas hovered behind her, not quite ready to move closer. Then he did. He stepped beside Claire and placed a hand on Josh's shoulder. I'm sorry, he said, voice low and full of gravel, for not listening, for not seeing you, for making you feel like you had to disappear. Josh didn't respond, but Claire saw the way his fingers curled slightly tighter around hers. A pause settled in the room. Not silence, not peace, just a pause. The moment between crisis and healing. Claire leaned down and kissed Josh's forehead. Then she whispered something only he could hear. I noticed. I promise you, I noticed. Josh didn't speak for the first 2 days. He opened his eyes, nodded when spoken to, followed instructions with slow, shaky movements, but his voice remained hidden, like it had retreated somewhere deep inside and wasn't ready to come out. Claire sat by his side through each hour, gently spooning water into his mouth, holding tissues to his nose when he coughed, smoothing his hair back with trembling fingers. She never asked him to talk. She didn't press. Thomas came and went. He brought changes of clothes, coffee, a new charger for Claire's phone. He didn't hover, but he didn't vanish either. One night, Claire caught him sitting alone in the hospital chapel, hands clasped together, not praying, just thinking. On the third morning, a nurse removed the drainage tube. Josh winced but didn't cry. That afternoon, Dr. Harris came by with good news. The infection was under control, his vitals were stable, and if things continued to improve, he could go home the next day. Claire felt something like relief stir in her chest, but it was small, fragile, almost guilty. Going home didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like something they would have to rebuild from the ground up. That night, while Josh slept, Claire finally went down to the hospital cafe for a real meal. She hadn't left the floor in over 48 hours. The food was terrible, but she forced down a sandwich and drank a hot tea that tasted like metal. When she returned to the room, Thomas was there. He asked for you, he said quietly. Claire rushed to the bed. Josh was awake, his eyes hazy but more focused than before. Hey, she whispered, brushing his arm. Josh stared at her, his lips parted. Does it look bad? Claire blinked. No, she said instantly. No, baby, it doesn't. He gave the faintest smile, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The next morning, they discharged him with antibiotics, wound care instructions, and a stack of paperwork an inch thick. Thomas signed everything while Claire packed up the bag of clothes and half-read magazines. Josh changed into a clean hoodie and sweatpants, his movements slow and careful. Walking out of the hospital felt surreal. The sky was overcast, the parking lot half full, people going about their days as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't nearly ended inside those walls. The car ride was quiet. Josh leaned against the window, earbuds in but not playing music. Claire kept glancing back at him through the rearview mirror. When they pulled into the driveway, something about the house looked different, smaller, dimmer. Josh went straight upstairs. Claire didn't stop him. Thomas dropped the hospital bag by the front door and exhaled. "Well, we're home." Claire didn't answer. That evening she made soup. Josh came down, ate half a bowl, then went back to his room without a word. She let him. Later she found herself staring at the door to his room, unsure if she should knock. Instead she walked to the kitchen and opened a mail. In the middle of the pile was a thick envelope from the hospital billing department. She opened it slowly. The total balance due, $12,642.18 after insurance. Claire sat down at the table and read every line. ER admission, imaging, IV medications, surgery, anesthesia, 3-night stay, post-op care, pharmacy charges. She ran a hand through her hair and set the letter aside. Thomas came in a few minutes later, saw the envelope, picked it up. He didn't say anything. "Can we cover it?" she asked softly. "Not all at once," he said. "I'll call about a payment plan." Claire nodded. They didn't talk about it again that night. At 2:13 a.m., Claire woke to the sound of footsteps. She crept to the hallway and peeked around the corner. Josh stood in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator. The light cast long shadows across his face. Claire didn't say anything. After a minute, he closed the door, poured a glass of water, and turned, startled to see her. He started. "You don't have to explain," she said gently. He nodded. "Can't sleep?" she asked. Josh hesitated. "I have dreams." Claire's heart clenched. "Do you want to talk about them?" He shook his head. She didn't press. "Just come sit for a minute," she said. Josh joined her at the table. She poured him more water. They sat in silence for a long time. And then, just before standing to leave, Josh spoke again. "Do you still have that drawing?" Claire blinked. "The one from your hoodie pocket?" He nodded. "I do," she said. "Do you want it back?" Josh looked down at the table. "No," he whispered. "I don't want to be that person again." Claire reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. "You're not," she said. "You're still you. But you're not alone anymore." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. Recovery was not linear. Some days Josh ate breakfast at the table. Other days he barely came out of his room. He slept more than usual, startled awake from dreams he never described, and often stared into space for long minutes at a time like he was waiting for something to make sense again. Claire learned to stop filling silence with noise. She didn't ask how he was unless she meant it, and when she did, she waited for real answers, even when they didn't come. Instead of pushing, she stayed. She sat on the floor of his room some nights reading a book while he sketched quietly at his desk. She learned that healing wasn't a conversation, it was a presence. A chair pulled up next to pain, a hand offered without demand. Thomas changed too, though in smaller, more subtle ways. He stopped making jokes to lighten the mood. He started listening longer than he talked. When Josh mentioned, once in passing, that he missed drawing at the library, Thomas got up early the next morning and drove them both there, without saying a word about it. The house began to feel like a home again, even if the shadows lingered. But the bills didn't wait. One Thursday afternoon, Claire found Thomas in the garage, staring at a spreadsheet taped to the wall. A notepad filled with numbers sat nearby. Insurance codes, balances, minimum payments. She leaned against the doorway. "You working on the payment plan?" Thomas nodded, trying to figure out how much we can pay each month without defaulting on the car. Claire walked closer. "We'll make it work," she said softly. He didn't look up. "We shouldn't have to choose between a car and keeping our kid alive." Claire said nothing. "I called the hospital again, asked if we qualified for financial relief. They said we're above the line by $700. "Above the line," Claire repeated, as if barely getting by is a privilege. Thomas shook his head. "This system isn't built for families like us." "No," Claire said, "it's not." There was a long pause before she added, "But we're still here." He finally looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "we are." That weekend, Josh came downstairs on his own and made himself a sandwich. Claire watched him from the living room, trying not to cry at the simple act of mustard on bread. Later that day, she knocked on his door to bring up laundry and found him hunched over his sketchbook. He didn't hide it this time. He looked up, then slowly turned the book around. Claire felt her breath hitch. It was another self-portrait, but this one was different, the same hooded figure, but the hoodie was down. The shoulders were still rounded, still small, but the face was turned slightly upward. There was color, light grays, soft yellows coming from behind the figure like sunrise. "I like this one," Claire whispered. Josh didn't smile, but his eyes met hers without flinching. "I didn't think I'd want to draw again," he said. "What changed?" Josh looked at the paper, tracing a line gently with his fingertip. "I guess I wanted to see if I could make something not sad." Claire stepped forward and placed the folded drawing from the hospital on the table beside him, the one with the words, "If I disappear, would anyone notice?" Josh stared at it for a long moment. Then quietly, he took it and placed it in the back of his sketchbook, not to erase it, just to put it behind him. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Josh stood in the bathroom brushing his teeth. He stared at the mirror, toothbrush idle in one hand, foam drying at the corner of his mouth. He used to avoid his reflection, used to turn off the light before he finished, or splash water quickly and leave. But now, he looked. The bandage was off. A faint line curved beneath his jaw, small but real. His skin was healing, slowly, imperfectly. Josh leaned closer and studied his own eyes. He didn't look away, not this time. 3 weeks after the surgery, Josh returned to school. The morning was quiet. He stood by the front door, backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie zipped halfway up. The scar beneath his jaw was mostly hidden now, but he still felt it, like a reminder stitched into his skin. Claire fussed over his lunch, double-checked the medication he needed to take with him, then stepped back and looked at him. "You okay?" she asked. Josh gave a small nod. "You don't have to say yes just for me," she added. He hesitated. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But I want to try." Claire smiled and smoothed his hair. "That's all I needed to hear." Thomas offered to drive him, which surprised both of them. Josh climbed into the passenger seat without a word, and the ride was filled with low music and long silences. When they pulled up in front of the school, Thomas turned off the engine. "Before you go," he said, clearing his throat, "I want to tell you something." Josh glanced over, cautious. "I wasn't a great kid," Thomas began. "I had a temper. I hit a lot, and my dad, your grandpa, he didn't believe in talking about anything. He thought silence made you strong." Josh stared at him. Thomas took a deep breath. "I carried that for a long time, thought I had to be the same way, and then you showed up. This amazing, quiet little boy who saw the world in color, while I only ever saw black and white." His voice cracked, "And I didn't know how to protect that. I thought making you tough would keep you safe, but I see now that what you needed was to be seen, just as you are." Josh didn't speak, but his fingers flexed slightly around the strap of his backpack. Thomas nodded. "I'm sorry, kiddo." A beat. Then Josh whispered, "Thanks for saying that." Thomas smiled. Josh got out of the car, hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the school. He moved slowly, but he didn't look back. Claire, meanwhile, had started attending a local support group for parents of teens struggling with mental health. Every Wednesday night, she sat in a circle of strangers who didn't feel like strangers for long. They talked about fear, guilt, resilience, and the unbearable weight of almost. The second week, Claire stood up and told their story. Not the medical chart version, but the real one. The missed signs, the long silences, the drawing in the hoodie pocket. "I didn't realize how much pain could hide behind a closed door," she said, "and how easily love can look like presence, even when it's absence." After the meeting, another mother approached her. Her son had stopped talking 6 months ago. She asked what Claire would have done differently. Claire thought for a long time before answering. "I would have stopped trying to fix," she said, "and started trying to listen. At home, things weren't perfect. The hospital bill still loomed, the house still creaked in the cold, Josh still had nights when the dreams came back, and the silence stretched too long. But there were moments that felt like light breaking through a crack. One afternoon, Josh left his door open while he worked on a drawing. Claire passed by, peeked in. The sketch on the table was of a boy walking across a bridge, half in shadow, half in sunlight. Another evening, Thomas asked Josh if he wanted to go for a walk. To their surprise, he said yes. They didn't talk much, but when they returned, Claire saw something new in Josh's posture. Not happiness exactly, but peace. He was still healing. They all were. One Saturday morning, Claire walked into Josh's room and found him standing in front of the mirror again. He was wearing a button-up shirt. The scar was visible now, faint but there. He met her eyes in the reflection. Think I look weird? He asked. Claire shook her head. I think you look like someone who's been through hell and came back stronger. Josh turned. Then, for the first time in months, he smiled. Not small, not hesitant, real. Later that afternoon, he grabbed his sketchbook, slung it under his arm, and walked to the park alone. Claire watched him from the window, his gait slow, his shoulders square, his chin slightly lifted to the sky. Not the same boy, but still her boy. And in the quiet that followed, Claire let herself exhale. They had made it through. Not perfectly, but together. We wait too long to listen. We wait for a scream when a whisper was enough. So now I ask you, are you listening yet?